You don't have a home here anymore." The words struck like a hammer, splitting Clara's heart in two right on her familiar doorstep. She froze, her hand still gripping her cane, her body trembling in disbelief at what she had just heard. Only 3 weeks ago, when she entered the operating room for hip surgery, she had naively thought she would return to her family's embrace. But now, what awaited her was the cold gaze of her daughter-in-law and the shameful silence of her only son. The red brick house before her, the one she and her husband had spent their whole lives building, suddenly felt alien. It was no longer a home filled with memories, but a fortress that had been seized. "Arthur," her voice caught, faint. "What did you just say? This is my house. It's where you grew up." Arthur wouldn't look at her directly. He glanced at Evelyn, then sighed. "Mom, the power of attorney you signed before your surgery, we used it to transfer the house. This house is ours now." Clara staggered, her heart racing. Everything in her head spun as if she had just fallen from a great height. Evelyn crossed her arms, a challenging smirk playing on her lips. "That's right. Now you should get going. We have our own plans for this house. The longer you stay, the more inconvenient it is." A cold wind whipped across the porch, carrying the scent of jasmine from the front garden, a scent tied to so many summers of Arthur's childhood. The memory was like another twist of the knife in Clara's heart. She looked at her son, hoping to see a hint of remorse, a flicker of the boy who used to cry in her arms. But Arthur just hung his head, his hands hidden in his pockets, trembling, saying nothing more. In that instant, Clara understood. She had been betrayed at her very core, not just by her greedy daughter-in-law, but by her own flesh and blood. She turned, each step heavy as she left the porch. The cane tapped rhythmically on the concrete, matching her aching heartbeat. Every step was a cut, as if she were being exiled from her own life. Behind her, the front door closed with a definitive click. The sound echoed like a life sentence. Clara didn't look back. She knew if she glanced back one more time, she would collapse right there on the spot she once called home. And in her chest, only one question repeated itself, haunting as a funeral bell. Why would my own son throw me out onto the street? Desperate and trembling as night fell, she knew there was only one lifeline to reach for. "Martha, they've kicked me out of my house." Clara uttered the words into the phone, a cry for help from the abyss. The other end was silent for a few seconds, save for the sound of a sharp intake of breath. Then, a deep, firm female voice rang out. "Clara, where are you? Stay right there. I'm coming." That night, Clara sat stunned on a bus stop bench, her trembling hands clutching a small overnight bag. She had just left her home. No, more accurately, been evicted, and now had nowhere to return. In her moment of weakness, only one name had flashed in her mind: Martha. They had known each other for nearly 40 years, since their days volunteering together at the local women's association. Martha was now a prominent lawyer, a widow like Clara, but strong, sharp, and incredibly capable. If there was anyone on earth who could help her, it was Martha. Martha's car screeched to a halt at the curb. The door flew open, and the friend's gaze landed on Clara, pale, shivering, her shoulders slumped, not just from age, but from the weight of betrayal. "Get in," Martha said. No further questions needed. Just two simple words, like a life raft thrown into the chasm. In Martha's warm apartment, Clara finally broke down. Tears streamed as if to wash away the fresh wounds that had just been torn open. Martha sat across from her, placed a hot cup of tea in her friend's hands, and waited in silence. When the tears subsided, Clara recounted everything in a shaky voice. The power of attorney, the house, Evelyn's cruel words, Arthur's deadly silence. Martha listened, her eyes darkening, until she finally slammed her own coffee mug down on the table. They think because you're old, you're an easy target? Not on my watch. Let me see the paperwork. Clara fumbled in her bag, pulling out a copy of the power of attorney she had signed before her surgery. At the time, she had trusted her son and daughter-in-law completely, thinking they just wanted to help handle minor financial procedures. Martha took it, her eyes scanning quickly over every line. Well, her voice dropped. They've turned this into a knife and stabbed you right in the back. Clara shook her head, choking back a sob. I trusted Arthur. I never thought. My own son. Martha placed a hand on Clara's, squeezing it tightly. Listen to me. You haven't lost everything. Yes, they took the house, but I've seen this before. This isn't just a property grab. I smell something much bigger. Clara looked up, surprised. What do you mean? Martha lowered her voice. I know the Monroe family. They were involved in some shady dealings in Dallas. If Evelyn is part of that web, then this isn't just about the house. This is a conspiracy. The air in the room grew heavy. The wind outside rustled the curtains, a silent warning. Martha stood, opened her laptop, and quickly navigated through several legal and news databases. Her hands moved deftly, her gaze as sharp as a blade cutting through the night. Clara watched, suddenly realizing this was why she had come to Martha. While she had fallen, Martha was still a fire that refused to go out. Clara, Martha turned back, her voice firm, you need to prepare yourself. It's not just the house. I am certain they've drained your other accounts. Clara was stunned. They couldn't have. Martha typed a few keys, accessing the online banking system Clara had saved. When the screen loaded, a cold number delivered another blow. Over $220,000 was gone from her investment account. Clara's jaw dropped, her hands shaking violently. Oh, God. Martha bit her lip, then spoke with a steely tone. Listen to me, Clara. This isn't a family dispute anymore. This is organized fraud. And if I'm right, the FBI has had their eye on them for a long time. In the room, lit only by the dim glow of the desk lamp, Clara looked at Martha, her best friend, and now her only savior. She saw in that gaze not just friendship, but the fierce resolve of a legal warrior. A thought flickered in Clara's mind, part terrifying, part hopeful. Maybe I'm not completely alone. Maybe this fight is just beginning. Immediately, Martha set to work, and what she uncovered was even darker than Clara could have imagined. $220,000 doesn't just disappear because of one greedy daughter-in-law. Behind Evelyn, there's an entire army, Martha said, her voice cold as steel. Clara sat silently, her empty gaze fixed on the bright red number on the laptop screen. $220,000, what she and her husband had saved their entire lives, every penny from his days at the factory, from countless frugal meals, now gone as if it never existed. Martha turned the screen toward herself, quickly typing the name Monroe into a legal database she had access to. Familiar names popped up. Leonard Monroe, the family patriarch, previously linked to a shady transaction in Dallas, but had evaded charges due to lack of evidence. a few shell companies, property records bought and sold within months at unnaturally high profits. Here it is. Martha pointed to the screen. You see? The Monroe family aren't just normal real estate developers. They've been suspected of money laundering, asset seizure, fraud. Evelyn didn't target Arthur by chance. Clara clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. You mean it was all a trap? Martha nodded, her eyes flashing with a cold light. A carefully laid trap. They didn't just take your house. Look, they're in the process of buying at least 4 other houses in your neighborhood. If they get enough, they can petition the city to rezone from residential to commercial. And then, Clara whispered, the whole neighborhood would be worth tens of millions. The air in the room thickened. The ticking of the wall clock sliced through the silence. Clara was reeling. The trap was perfect. She was hospitalized, helpless, and in that time, they drained her money, seized her home, and quietly took over the entire neighborhood. She felt as if her whole life had been calculated, squeezed, step by step. If this is all true, Clara mumbled. Arthur, my son, did he know from the beginning? Martha didn't answer right away. She pulled another file from her drawer and placed it on the table. I'm afraid so. The file contained leaked emails a colleague had once forwarded to Martha regarding the Monroe deals in Dallas. And at the end of the email chain, there was one name: Arthur Davis, Clara's son. Clara was floored. Oh my God, it can't be. My son? He's been a part of this for that long? Martha gripped her shoulder. Clara, I know this is like a knife to your heart, but you have to face it. Arthur is no longer just a victim being manipulated by his wife. He is a part of this network. Clara's vision blurred. She remembered the moments Arthur avoided her gaze when she asked about finances, the times Evelyn answered for him, the empty promises of, "Don't worry, Mom, I've got it covered." Now it all formed a horrifying picture. Her son was an accomplice. Clara grabbed Martha's hand, trembling. What do I do now? I'm just an old woman. And they are. Martha took a sharp breath, her voice low but resolute. You are not fighting alone. And I think the FBI will want to hear this story. The Monroe family has been on their radar for a long time. We just need to give them what they've been missing. Proof. Clara looked at Martha. Her friend's eyes were now like a shining sword in the darkness. Fear still churned inside her, but beneath it, another spark was catching. A spark of defiance, of a thirst for justice. In that moment, Clara made a silent vow. If they think they can swallow my entire life and leave no scar, they are wrong. Wasting no time, Martha immediately took Clara and all the initial evidence to the FBI field office. They were shown into a small meeting room seated across from a seasoned agent. If you truly want justice, you're going to have to walk back into the lion's den, Special Agent Hayes of the FBI said, his sharp gaze fixed on Clara. The small federal briefing room was blindingly lit by fluorescent lights. The space was so quiet Clara could hear her own heart thudding in her chest. She sat huddled, hands clasped, listening as Martha explained the entire situation to the investigative team. The agents nodded, flipping through the file Martha had provided. The power of attorney, the bank statements, the list of houses the Monroes had purchased in the neighborhood. But when Hayes looked up, his gaze locked onto Clara, his voice cold but firm. This is all just pieces. We need irrefutable evidence, a confession or a direct recording from Monroe's own mouth. And the only person who can get them to lower their guard is you. Clara looked up, stunned. You mean I have to go back to that house? Martha immediately objected. No, she's just had surgery. She's still recovering. You can't. Hayes cut her off. I understand the risk. But Mrs. Clara is the key. The Monroes won't talk freely with us, but with her, the person they think is utterly powerless, it's different. The room fell silent. Clara felt the air thicken, as if it would suffocate her. To go back to that house, to face Arthur, Evelyn, and Leonard, it was a nightmare. But Martha's gaze met hers, a mix of worry and hope, forcing her to ask herself, if not me, then who? Clara swallowed hard, her voice trembling. If I do it, what do I have to do? Hayes leaned forward, lowering his voice. We'll fit you with a miniature recording device, small enough to capture every word. You just need to provoke them. Get Leonard or Evelyn to slip up and talk about the money in the papers. After that, we intervene immediately. Martha frowned. It's too dangerous. What if they find it? Hayes replied, his voice solid. We'll have surveillance around the area. The second you give the signal, the tactical team moves in. But we need that direct confession. Otherwise, this case collapses. Clara gripped the edge of the table. The image of the red brick house flashed in her mind, along with Evelyn's cold voice. You don't have a home here anymore. Her heart still ached, but mixed with the pain was a rising flame. She could not let them devour her whole life so easily. She took a deep breath and looked directly at Hayes. All right, I'll be the bait. Martha shot up, grabbing her shoulder. Clara, you're insane. They aren't just fraudsters. I'm positive they would do anything to silence you. Clara placed her hand on Martha's, a sad but determined smile on her face. Martha, I've lost my home, my money, and my faith in my son. I can't lose my dignity, too. If I have to take a risk, let it be for justice. A flicker of satisfaction crossed Hayes's eyes. He nodded, signaling for another agent to make preparations. The next afternoon, standing on the doorstep of the house that was once hers, Clara trembled, the small recorder hidden in her coat. Every sense was on high alert, every breath heavy. Inside, Evelyn and Leonard were waiting. She knew that one wrong question, one hesitant gesture, and they would become suspicious. When the door opened, Evelyn stared at her with sharp eyes. What are you doing back here? Clara swallowed, forcing her voice to remain calm. I just want to talk. I don't want to lose my family. If possible, I want to negotiate. In the dim hallway, the recording device blinked a tiny red light. Outside, from a distance, the FBI vans were ready. Clara stepped inside, her heart pounding. She knew that every word, every second that followed, could decide everything, whether justice would be served or whether death would find her first. Inside, the atmosphere was as cold as a den. You want to negotiate? With us? Leonard Monroe let out a dry, gravelly laugh. Clara sat on the armchair in the living room, the room where she and her husband used to have tea every morning, now as cold and alien as a stranger's lair. Her hand was hidden deep in her coat pocket, her trembling fingers brushing the small button on the recorder. The red light continued its faint pulse, a second heart beating in time with the fear in her chest. Evelyn sat opposite, arms crossed, her stare like a sharp knife. You didn't come here to beg, Clara. This house, your money, it's all done. Legal. No one can save you. Clara swallowed thickly, forcing herself to stay calm. I just want to understand. Why would you do this? Why take everything from an old woman? Leonard leaned in, smirking. Because you were easy, Clara. Old people like you sign things without reading. You trusted your son, and your son has been in our pocket for a long time. Clara felt every word twist in her heart, but she suppressed her emotions, asking softly, her voice trembling like a truly weak person. And the money, the $220,000. What did you do with it? Leonard laughed loudly, overconfident, the exact trap the FBI was waiting for. He stood, poured himself a glass of whiskey, his voice gleeful. Your money is now the foundation for this whole area. We're buying up every house one by one. When we have enough, we'll force the city to rezone, from residential to commercial. You know, a few million turns into 20 million, just with a signature. And it all started with your stupid bank account. Clara struggled to keep her face blank, but inside, her heart was screaming. I've got it. The confession. Evelyn shot her father a look, snapping. Don't talk so much, Dad. She's just pretending to be weak. Leonard waved her off, sitting back down with a sneer. It doesn't matter if she knows. Who's going to believe a trembling old woman fresh out of surgery? We've still got Nina at the hospital handling things. If we need to, we can have her dragged right back to a hospital bed anytime. Clara nearly choked. Nina, my nurse? Before she could ask more, the living room door slammed open. Arthur appeared. He saw his mother and froze. Mom, what are you doing here? The air snapped taut, like a string about to break. Evelyn quickly interjected. She's just here to cry and beg. Pay her no mind. Arthur frowned, but said nothing. His gaze met Clara's. A flicker of shame crossed his face, and then it was gone. In her pocket, Clara's finger slipped. She pressed the button. The signal. The FBI had heard enough. But in that exact instant, Leonard's rough hand shot out and grabbed Clara's arm. He yanked her hard, sending her lurching, her cane clattering loudly onto the floor. What are you hiding in there? Leonard roared. Blood rushed to Clara's head, her ears ringing. A life or death moment. She tried to clutch her pocket, but Leonard had already snagged a corner of the fabric. Tires screeched outside. The front door burst open. A shout thundered through the house. FBI, don't move. In a flash, the house turned into a war zone. Flashlights blinded them. Boots pounded the floor. Leonard snarled, letting go of Clara to make a break for the back door, but 2 agents had him pinned to the floor. Evelyn shrieked, struggling, and was handcuffed in an instant. Clara slumped back into the chair, gasping for breath, her whole body shaking. Amid the flashing lights, she saw Arthur, still standing motionless, his face as white as ash. He didn't resist. There was nothing left to resist. In Clara's pocket, the small recorder was still blinking its red light, the living proof that had just exposed the entire Monroe network. Everybody down! FBI! The shout ripped through the thick tension in the living room like thunder. Leonard Monroe was still snarling as 2 agents descended on him, slamming his face into the wooden floor. He struggled, roaring, "You have no right! This is my house!" But before he could finish, the cold steel of handcuffs snapped around his wrists. Evelyn shrieked, making a dash for the stairs, but a female agent cut her off, twisting her arm behind her back, cuffing her in a single motion. Her face was distorted with rage as she screamed, "You old hag! You did this to me!" Clara sat silently in the chair, her heart pounding. She didn't answer. In her eyes, Evelyn was just a stranger now, a greedy puppet dragged into the light. Martha rushed in right behind the FBI team, hugging Clara tightly. "My God, are you all right? I almost thought I'd lost you." Clara nodded, trembling. Her breathing was ragged, but her eyes were firm. "I'm still here, Martha. Thanks to you, and to them." Arthur, however, stood frozen in the corner of the room, not cuffed, not dragged away, just standing there, watching it all fall apart. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot, his hands clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. Agent Hayes walked in, took the small recorder from Clara, and nodded to his subordinate. "We have everything. The confession, the real estate conspiracy, the admission of medical manipulation. There's no denying it." Leonard was still struggling, sputtering. "You think you can ruin me? I have lawyers. I have money." Hayes bent down, his voice icy. "You can buy lawyers, but you can't buy back the stupid words you just confessed into our recording device." Evelyn shrieked, struggling against her cuffs. "Arthur, say something! Defend me!" Arthur turned, his lips trembling, but the only words that escaped were a whisper. "You've destroyed everything. Everything." Clara looked at her son, tears welling. For a second, she saw the little boy who used to run through the garden, calling, "Mommy, I fell." But the second passed as quickly as it came. The man in front of her was a distorted shadow, caught in a spiral of crime. Hayes approached him, his voice firm. "Mr. Arthur Davis, we have evidence suggesting you were an accomplice in several illegal transactions with the Monroe family. You'll need to come to the precinct for questioning." Arthur didn't resist. He just hung his head, his shoulders slumping like a man who had lost all strength. Clara trembled, quickly saying, "Wait. Please listen to his explanation. He's still my son." Hayes looked at her, his gaze softening slightly. "Mrs. Clara, we will give him that chance. But the truth is not merciful." The house echoed with footsteps, the jangling of cuffs, the rustling of papers. The old home had transformed into a legal battlefield, a place where the truth was being mercilessly exposed. As the transport vehicles pulled away, leaving flashing red and blue lights in the window, Clara finally let her shoulders relax. She knew the battle wasn't over. The name Nina, the nurse who had been mentioned, was still a ghost in the shadows. Martha squeezed her hand tightly, whispering, "You see? The arm of the law is long. Now we can unravel their entire network." Clara nodded faintly, her eyes tearful. But deep within them, there was a new light, a light of hope that justice was slowly being restored. The investigation expanded immediately. With the confessions from Leonard and Evelyn, the FBI quickly summoned the nurse who had been named. Back at headquarters, Agent Hayes placed a new file in front of Clara. "Her name is Nina Porter, and you need to know the whole truth." The interrogation room was dead silent. The cold, white neon light beat down, making the words in the file stand out like scars. Clara stared at the name Nina Porter, the nurse who had cared for her for 3 weeks in the hospital, the woman she had trusted, who she thought was helping her. Martha sat beside her, squeezing her hand. "Clara, are you ready to hear this?" Clara nodded faintly, her voice trembling. "Tell me. Everything." Hayes sighed, turning the pages. "During your entire hospital stay, Nina was accepting money from Leonard Monroe. Her job was to prolong your hospital stay. She adjusted your medication. slowed your recovery process. And worse, she was the one who induced a minor infection at your hip incision site. Clara swayed, her hands shaking, her heart seizing. Oh, God, no. She injected me with something? Hayes nodded slowly. A mild bacteria, enough to extend your treatment, but not to cause severe complications. They needed you away from the house long enough to complete the withdrawals and the property transfer. And Nina did exactly that. Clara covered her mouth, tears streaming. She remembered every night in that hospital bed, the unusual stinging pain, the persistent fatigue, but always being soothed by Nina's words. Don't worry, you're recovering wonderfully. Those words now became a poisoned blade, cutting deep into her fragile trust. Martha gritted her teeth, her voice sharp. Despicable. Medical bribery to imprison a patient. There's no line they won't cross. Hayes turned another page. But that's not the worst part. While you were in the hospital, the Monroe family also took out a new life insurance policy, with Arthur as the beneficiary. Their final plan was to move you to a remote nursing home where no one could contact you, and from there, wait for the day the policy could be activated. The room felt like it was freezing over. Clara felt the blood turn to ice in her veins. She whispered, her voice barely audible. They were planning for my death? Hayes nodded. Yes. To them, you were no longer a person. You were an asset, a tool to generate profit. Clara broke down, sobbing. Her entire body shook as if it would break apart. Martha wrapped an arm around her friend's shoulders, patting her gently. Clara, you have to be strong. You survived. That is the ultimate proof that they did not win. At that moment, the door opened. 2 agents led Nina Porter in, handcuffed. The nurse's once kind face was now pale, her lips trembling. Hayes gestured. Clara, do you want to hear it from her? Clara wiped her tears and nodded. Nina stared at the floor, her voice choked. I'm sorry. I just thought it was easy money. Leonard said it wouldn't be any serious harm, just keep you in the hospital a few more weeks. I didn't know they were going as far as a life insurance policy. Clara looked directly at Nina, her eyes red-rimmed but blazing. You smiled at me. You told me I was recovering well. You held my hand and called me Mrs. Clara. And all the while, you were poisoning me. Nina cried, but her tears couldn't wash away the crime. Martha's jaw was tight. You see, Clara, this is their true face, and now they will pay. Clara took a deep breath, lifting her chin. The pain was still raw, but a new resilience shone in her eyes. They planned for my death, but I am still alive, and I will not be silent for one more second. After confronting the nurse, Clara requested to speak with her son privately. The meeting took place in another interrogation room where Arthur no longer looked like an accomplice, but simply a broken man. I have nothing left to hide, Arthur whispered, his voice hoarse as the door closed behind him. Clara sat on the other side of the cold metal table, Martha beside her like a steady anchor. Between them, Arthur kept his head down, his shoulders slumped, his hands twisting together so tightly they were white. For the first time in days, Clara truly saw her son, not the arrogant or cold man, but a shattered human being, backed into a corner. Martha gave Clara's hand a slight squeeze, signaling her to let the silence stretch. In the end, Arthur had to be the one to speak. Arthur took a deep, shaky breath and began. I got involved months ago. I was in debt. The Monroe family knew, and they used it to blackmail me. They promised if I sided with them, I'd be free of the debt, the legal troubles. I agreed. Clara bit her lip, the feeling like a fresh stab wound. Arthur, you let them use me as bait? You knew what they planned to do with the house? Arthur nodded, tears welling. I knew about the real estate, about the money in the account. But you have to believe me, Mom. I knew nothing about the hospital plan. I never knew they bribed Nina. I never knew about the life insurance. When I heard Evelyn's father bragging, I was as shocked as you. Clara trembled, tears in her eyes. And yet, you stayed silent. You let them drain every penny, take away my home. You watched me struggle on my painful hip, only to come home and be thrown out by my own son. Was that the price of your silence, Arthur? Arthur dropped his head, his shoulders shaking. A tear hit the metal table and shattered. Mom, I was a coward. I thought I was protecting my little family, my wife, my reputation. But in the end, I betrayed you. I betrayed Dad. Martha stared at him, her voice sharp as a razor. Are you only sorry because you got caught? Or do you truly realize you pushed your own mother into hell? Arthur choked back a sob, looking up. His gaze met Clara's, red-rimmed and tear-filled but still bright. I'll confess everything. I'll tell them everything the Monroes did, about the shell companies, about the money trail. If it's the only way to keep you safe, I'll do it. Even if I go to prison. Clara clenched her fists, tears streaming. Her whole life she had only wanted to keep her family together, and now her only son sat before her, confessing in bitter defeat. Her heart was both broken and clinging to a shred of hope that, in this wreckage, there was still a chance. Arthur, she whispered, her voice thick. You sold me out. But if you stand up against them today, at least you are still my son. In that moment, Arthur broke down completely, sobbing the racking sobs of a grown man who sounded like a lost child, finally finding his way back to his mother. Hayes entered, nodding. If you cooperate, we can offer a deal. You'll get a lighter sentence, but you must provide every detail. This is your only chance. Arthur nodded vigorously, without hesitation. Clara closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. The pain still churned inside her, but with it came a thin ray of light. Perhaps from these ruins, there was still a chance for her son to redeem a part of himself. With Arthur's testimony, combined with the irrefutable evidence from the recorder and the financial documents, the case moved quickly to trial. Weeks later, Clara and Martha were present in federal court. All rise. The federal district court is now in session. The sound of the gavel striking the bench echoed through the packed courtroom. Clara sat in the front row, reserved for victims and witnesses. Her heart pounded, her trembling hand held steady by Martha's. All around them, reporters, locals, and lawyers were crammed in. The community that had once been silent about the Monroe family had turned out to see the truth exposed. In the defendant's box, Leonard Monroe sat upright, his dark suit still impeccable, but his eyes shadowed with anxiety. Beside him, Evelyn sat with a face as cold as stone, while her mother looked down, nervously fiddling with a necklace. Nina Porter, in an orange jumpsuit, had red, swollen eyes. And Arthur, Clara's son, was there too, his face gaunt, his eyes filled with sorrow. The prosecutor stood, his voice booming. Your Honor, members of the jury, this is not just a case of financial fraud. This is an organized conspiracy involving a multitude of crimes: abuse of power of attorney, asset seizure, money laundering, medical manipulation, and conspiracy to commit murder via life insurance fraud. A murmur swept the room. The judge banged his gavel, calling for order. When Clara was called to the stand, she walked with her cane. She was shaking, but her eyes were bright. She recounted every detail: being thrown out of her home by her son and daughter-in-law, the disappearance of the $220,000, her suspicions in the hospital, and finally, the day she pretended to negotiate to record Leonard's confession. Her voice broke as she said, "They didn't just steal my money. They wanted to steal my life. But I am still standing here because I believe that justice never dies." The courtroom was silent. Many wiped away tears. Martha smiled with pride. Leonard's defense attorney tried to rebut. "My client is just a businessman. He never intended to kill anyone. The recording was just hyperbole, spoken in a private moment." But the prosecutor immediately presented the evidence: the bank statements, the property records, the life insurance policy with Arthur as the beneficiary, and the testimony of Nina, the nurse who had accepted the bribe. Nina stood on the stand, sobbing. "I did what Leonard Monroe instructed. I took the money to keep Mrs. Clara in the hospital. I am so sorry." Leonard's face flushed red, and he slammed his hand on the table. "She's lying. It's all lies." The judge banged his gavel, his voice stern. "Silence in my courtroom." When it was Arthur's turn, the entire room held its breath. He walked to the stand, his face pale, his hands shaking. "Yes, I knew about the real estate plan. I stayed silent. I betrayed my mother." His voice cracked. "But I knew nothing about the medical plot. When I learned the truth, I fell apart. And now, I am here to tell you everything. My father-in-law, Leonard Monroe, was behind it all. Evelyn was his accomplice. The Monroe family didn't just want her money. They wanted control over my mother's life." Clara watched her son, her eyes glistening. She couldn't forgive him, not yet. But a sliver of hope rose in her heart. At least he had chosen to stand on the side of truth. Finally, after days of deliberation, the judge stood, his voice ringing out as he read the verdict. Leonard Monroe, 20 years in federal prison for organized financial fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and money laundering. Evelyn Monroe, 18 years in prison on the same charges, with no possibility of parole. Nina Porter, 10 years in prison for accepting bribes and medical battery. Arthur Davis, 5 years in prison for conspiracy to commit fraud, reduced to 3 years in light of his cooperation and testimony against the Monroe family. Clara closed her eyes, a tear rolling down her cheek. It wasn't the joy of victory, but the release of a bitter burden. The judge banged his gavel one last time. "This court is adjourned. Justice has been served." As people filed out of the courtroom, Martha hugged Clara. "You see? You survived to see this day. The wheels of justice turn slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine." Clara looked up, her eyes shining through her tears. "Yes, but the price of seeing justice sometimes is more painful than any wound." 6 months after the trial, when the sentences had been handed down and the legal proceedings finalized, Clara was finally able to return to where she belonged. "This house, it's finally come back to me," Clara whispered, her trembling hand resting on the familiar, time-worn wooden door. Her red brick house was no longer a crime scene. It was a home again. Neighbors gathered, helping her restore the garden, repaint the fence, and wipe away the tarnish the Monroes had left behind. The sound of children's laughter returned to the neighborhood, as if chasing away the cold memories. Clara stood on the porch, taking a deep breath. The familiar scent of jasmine filled her lungs, carrying both the past and a sense of hope. The wound in her heart remained, but instead of suffocating her, it was now a reminder. She had survived. Martha approached, handing Clara a new file. "Are you sure about this? A project this big will take a lot of your energy." Clara smiled faintly, her eyes bright. "Martha, I once thought my life was over in that hospital, but their cruelty taught me something. Old people like us don't just need pity, we need protection. This will be my new purpose." In the file was a plan to expand her late husband's charitable foundation, adding a new wing dedicated to protecting the elderly from fraud. Lawyers, social workers, and volunteers would work together so that anyone, from widows and retirees to the infirm, would have a place to turn when they were at risk. On the day of the announcement, Clara stood at a wooden podium in the community hall. The lights were bright, hundreds of eyes on her. She was no longer a victim. She was a leader. "There was a time I thought I had lost everything, my home, my money, even my faith in my son. But then I understood. Pain only truly wins when we stay silent. I did not stay silent. And because of that, I am standing here today. If they could defraud me, they can defraud anyone. But from now on, no elderly person will have to face the darkness alone." The applause was thunderous, lasting for a long time. 3 years later, when Arthur was released early for good behavior, Clara was there at the prison gates. He walked out, thinner, his eyes hollow. When he saw his mother, he bowed his head. "Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me, but I will do whatever it takes to make things right." Clara looked at her son for a long time, tears streaming down her face. She didn't say, "I forgive you," nor did she speak of hatred. She simply opened her arms, and Arthur, shaking, hugged her tightly. The moment couldn't erase the past, but it planted the seed for a new future. Late one afternoon, Clara sat in her old armchair in the living room, the evening sun casting a golden glow on the wool rug. Martha brought in a hot pot of tea, and the two sat in comfortable silence, looking out at the garden. "You see," Martha smiled, "rebirth isn't about forgetting. It's about rising from the ashes." Clara nodded, her eyes bright. "Yes, and I have." Outside the window, the wind rustled through the jasmine, its fragrance spreading like a blessing. The house had returned, the community had healed, and Clara's heart, though scarred, was now beating strong with a new purpose. The end was not an ending. It was the beginning of a legacy.